Okay, so this is the first of two lectures for Thursday of week 1. So the first one is core concepts. Again, this will be review, like the lecture from Tuesday was. And so I just want to go over the core concepts and just kind of give you a little refresher on them. For those of you that took 220 last semester, these slides are pretty much the ones that we did straight out of lab, but I've taken some out and I've added a little bit of detail in places. So when it comes to the core concepts, I want you to be able to explain what is meant by a core concept, and then there are, I believe, 6 core concepts that we'll cover. Generally accepted that there are 15 of them in physiology. We're only talking about 6. As we go not only throughout this unit, but throughout class, throughout the semester, I want you to be able to talk about or provide an example and explain how certain things are affected or demonstrate each of these core concepts. So, what is a core concept? Okay, in this case, it's a key principle that's applying to all aspects of physiology, human and exercise. All right, now in the general sense, it's just a key concept, right? But we're taking this a little bit step further, or a step further, because we're talking about physiology. Another way to look at it is just kind of the big idea. Okay, so if we go back to this slide here, we've got 6 big ideas. We've got homeostasis, cell membrane, cell-to-cell communication, flow-down gradients, interdependent, and mass balance. Okay, now we talked about homeostasis earlier, so we're not going to focus on that one here. So when it comes to the cell membrane, this plays a huge role. Remember, the cell membrane is what determines what goes in a cell and what leaves a cell. At certain times, there are changes of the cell membrane which allows things to come in or to leave depending on what's going on. All right, but this is important because when things enter or leave a cell membrane, well, it changes the properties of a cell. So for example, with a neuron, as ions enter or leave, that can cause an action potential to occur. And an action potential is one way that a cell communicates with another. Okay, and that's really important, and it leads into the cell-to-cell communication. Okay, in order for you or anybody or any organism to function, we have to coordinate what's going on. And we do this by having the ability, for cells having the ability to to send signals from themselves to another cell. And this can take on 2 pathways, basically the endocrine or hormonal pathway, and then the neural pathway, okay, which uses neurotransmitters. Remember, the endocrine is kind of a global one, where hormones are released all throughout the body, whereas the neural process, it's very directed, and so a neuron sends a signal to a very specific location in the body. All right, now, as a result, one cell can communicate with another cell. Okay, the brain can send a signal via a neuron to the heart, specifically to the SA node, saying, I need you to increase the firing rate, so heart rate goes up. Or, like we talked about a little earlier, blood glucose is low, and so glucagon is released, and that causes the liver specifically to release glycogen so that blood glucose increases. And so if our cells don't talk to each other, well, then nothing will happen. Okay. And this is ultimately occurring so that our activities can be coordinated. Just think about what is required for you to just sit here listening to this video. Okay, so it's not really exercise here, but as you're sitting here, you need to make sure that your heart's contracting and your heart's relaxing. You need to make sure that your diaphragm's contracting to let air in, and that it's relaxing to let air out. Okay, at the same time, your eyes, you have to blink every once in a while. Okay, and there's going to be places where you're going to keep blood flow going, high levels of blood, whereas other places you're going to divert it. Okay, these are things that we don't have to think about, but what's happening in order for all of this stuff to happen is that your cells are communicating with each other. Okay. Now, the joke in 220 and even in 381 last semester is that my favorite core concept is flow-down gradients. And this is really how things move. Okay, flow-down gradients is the transport of stuff. And so ions, molecules, blood, gas, anything else that you can think of is a must. Without the movement of these things, nothing happens, right? So we talked just a moment ago about how a hormone is released. Well, a hormone is going to go from high concentration to low concentration. Without the movement of these hormones, in the example I gave previously, blood glucose won't be changed, and that's not great. Okay? And so we have to understand what flow is, and that's just the movement of substances from one point to the other. Okay? In order for flow to, or when we talk about flow, there's a lot of different types of flow that we can talk about. So ions and molecules moving. We could have fluids and gases going through tubes. Okay, so with this first one, we're talking about like sodium going into a neuron to cause an action potential. We've got blood going through blood vessels. Okay, we're going to talk about heat towards the end of the semester and how without a gradient, you're not going to be able to increase or decrease heat. But what is important is that for flow to occur, you have to have a gradient. Without gradient, there's no flow. When it comes to a gradient, that's just a difference in some measure between two areas. Now, oftentimes, when people think of gradients, they think of concentration. Well, that's only one type of gradient. We've got electrical potential, we've got pressure, we've got temperature. Okay, I'm not going to go through an example of each here, but I want you to think about this. What's an example of a concentration gradient? What's an example of an electrical potential gradient? What about pressure and temperature? Okay, and we'll talk about these more specifically in class, and we'll tie them into exercise specifically. Then we've got interdependence, and one of the things that I hope you understand by the time you leave this class, especially with exercise, is that interdependence is on full display here. Every physiological system relies on each other. Okay, if you want to exercise, what systems are you using? Okay, well, you're going to use your nervous system to tell your muscles to contract. You're going to use your respiratory system to get oxygen in. But then you're going to use the cardiovascular system to get that oxygen into your bloodstream so that the bloodstream can then take it to the muscles so that you can exercise. You're likely going to have some hormonal components to that as well. All right, so this isn't just, I'm exercising, it's all muscular system. No, it's pretty much everything. All right, and so everything relies on everything else. If you just think about your physiological systems, well, if you get rid of one, what's going to happen? Okay, what happens if you get rid of your hormones? Well, you're not going to be able to do a lot of things. If you get rid of your nervous system, you're not going to be able to do a lot of things. You get rid of your muscular system, you're not going to be able to move. Okay, and so these all work with each other to help maintain life, allow you to do exercise, allow you to just do your normal thing. So some examples. Nutrients get from your digestive system to your muscular system via cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular pressure is actually affected by both your respiratory and your urinary systems. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, just think about exercise in general, how nearly all of the systems are involved. The last one is mass balance, and we will talk about this a lot, especially when we get into oxygen and carbon dioxide transport. And so mass balance is just, well, how much of a given substance do you have? And this is determined by, well, what are you bringing in and what are you getting rid of? Okay, so let's just think about this from an exercise perspective. Well, the amount of carbon dioxide in your bloodstream is determined by how much carbon dioxide are you producing, but how much carbon dioxide are you actually getting rid of? Okay, and here's this in different words. Okay, so that's really what mass balance is. Okay, we're going to talk about how when you exercise, for the most part, your body's really good at breathing just enough. Cardiac output goes up just enough to maintain your oxygen and your CO2 levels. It doesn't do more than it needs. For the most part, it doesn't do less than it needs. It does just right. So that way we're at homeostasis or at steady state during exercise.